let's talk about the assignment first. So there's sort of two parts to the assignment, right? One is getting your tests to run on Travis. And so Travis recently, well, since last fall at least, updated its default build from like Ubuntu 14 to Ubuntu 16, either of which is what we're using, which is Ubuntu 18. And to be honest, I used to give sort of some complicated instructions about how to upgrade the G++ compiler on Travis and so on. And I somehow thought that the upgrade would sort of take care of all those issues for us. That's not true, and some nice proactive student on Saturday or Friday, right off the bat, kind of dug into this and said, hey, the easiest way to get Google Test running on Travis is to tell Travis to be more modern. And it's basically to say, hey, use this particular build for your Linux environment. So there's a bunch of different options. You can try to install a higher version of G++. You can tell Google Test CMake some extra info like we did. There's some Travis discussion in last assignment about doing this for the Cade machines. And with some modification that would work. But I think the easiest one is if you go search on Piazza for this public service announcement, not for me, a student. There's just one line you put in there to help it build. So if you get these errors on, like, I don't know about C++ 11 or something like that, look for those instructions and it should help you out quite a bit. Beyond that, the only thing I can say is, if you're not getting any response from Travis at all, it's probably something's wrong with your YAML file, the .yml thing. If it doesn't like it, it won't try to start a build. And I know I've seen a few things about builds being stuck or not doing any progress for a while. I haven't managed to catch that in the act, unfortunately. So whenever I look, it just says someone's build finished a minute ago, and I'm like, looks all right to me. But certainly I'll try to keep an eye on it on Wednesday and Thursday, and if someone's like been building for an hour, probably kill it off and restart it and see if that helps. That seems to be the basic mechanism you have. You just something gets stuck, you just tell it to stop and let it go. It sort of implies we have like a single queue or something like that for all this, which makes me a little nervous, right? But do try to get this tested a little bit before, 11:50 p.m. on Thursday is not likely to be the time to start doing multiple iterations of your YAML file trying to get things done. So why don't you get that wrapped up now, and we can do the code review stuff in the next few days. So for the code review, you should have gotten an email to your UID at Utah account, and hopefully you forward that to something more useful than that. Their model for grading is a little more restrictive than I realized. I thought you'd be able to see all the submissions and pick one or something like that, but they just have a queue of submissions that you grab from. And so while I said originally each team should submit once, to make this work, basically each person on a team should submit individually, and that way there'd be 2 copies of your assignment out there, and then when 2 people try to review it, there'd be 1 for each of them. So as many people try to helpfully point out, we have a 1 not equal to 2 problem in this assignment if you're all grading 2 things and you're only allowed to, anyway. So you pretend your assignment, make your assignment show up twice, each person on your team submit once, and then you go off and look at 2 of them, it balances out, 2 equals 2. So that should work. I was looking at some other mechanisms. There's something called the super grader, I almost turned you all into, and I thought maybe that was a bad idea. Go to your head or something like that. There's also been some commentary on Piazza about, I think there's a setting I should turn off for this, but right now you're allowed to leave a score. And don't leave a score. This is about the comments, not about saying, I think this assignment is a 35 or something like that. That's not helpful in some ways. Right? We're not grading here. We're giving some feedback. And I will also say for the code review Some comments on very forward stylistic issues are useful. You know, variable name doesn't make sense to me. Try to dig a little deeper than that into the flow of execution of the code. Look at the design of the functions, the recursive methods, and so on. Look at the logic and see if the logic makes sense. It takes a little more effort, but I think there's more to be said in those areas than just like nice variable name and or bad variable name. You know, just like you can kind of come up with more interesting things. And I think pondering these issues is sort of the value of this exercise in some ways. One, trying to understand other people's code, and two, trying to see if that expresses the idea clearly or not. Questions about either that, Travis, or this stuff? Yeah.
We're going to be like graded on like the quality of our comments, or like just like the multitude of our comments?
The multitude, yeah. Just make 6 comments and everything's good now. There is a mechanism, although it involves more scripting, to basically say, here's all the comments you made, basically. And I imagine we're going to just look at them a little bit and say, this seems like nice, thoughtful stuff, or this seems very cursory, and not too much in between those ranges, right? So try not to just totally blow it, and you should be okay. But we're trying to say something sort of interesting.
So we ran into a problem this morning, maybe because not enough people submitted, but me and my partner both submitted our code, and my partner, the only thing in the code was
your own.
Our own, and if you don't do anything, you'll just receive you and your class.
Yeah, so you might have to wait just a little bit. I did make the deadline for submitting tonight, because we need to have time to like read this stuff, right? So hopefully tonight all the submissions will be up there, and if not, we'll have to figure out some mechanism to try to push you along and actually submit. So one problem with this kind of stuff is that there's sort of bureaucratic hoops to jump through, and that's not listed anywhere. I had that possibility, and I said, okay, we better make a deadline so people turn this thing in. And I'll send out a reminder, but all you got to do is accept this invite, upload your code. It's not a big effort, but just go ahead and do it. Yeah.
So just to clarify, each person on a team should submit their own copy of
Your own
code.
copy. So there's 2 copies of your team's project up there.
And that should be done by me.
By tonight, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I might, yeah, anyway, yeah. Just please do this, please.
I don't know if you clarified this, but the way you accept the invite is through your email.
Yeah, I said it's essentially your email. Like I said, really, at this point in your life, you should be forwarding those things to whatever Gmail you have or something like that. But if not, now it's time to go look there and see what's going on with all the people trying to get in touch with you. Right? And if you don't see it in your email, please contact me and I can see what I can do to resend it. In fact, I think I just push a button and say resend invites to people that haven't accepted it yet, you'll send it. But that doesn't necessarily cure the issue if you don't actually see it in the email. Right? So maybe provide me an alternative email or something like that if that one's not going to work. Although the email is the only way we sort of know who you are in some sense. So if it's fuzzysocks@gmail or something like that, it's like, yeah, I don't know who you are. Anything else? All right, if the code post stuff sort of starts working out, we'll maybe try to use more of it. I do think it has a lot of value to look at code that's not your own or your partner that you're familiar with. So it took a little longer to get rolling here than I hoped, but we'll see. It still seems like a little bit of administrative complexity here. Anything else about the assignment? Well, it's not too bad that it usually waits at the very end, right? So give it some thought. All right, we're going to start making real user interfaces. It always seems a shame to me that a lot of intro CS is all little console stuff with like typing in numbers. What's the tip amount, you know? And then it spits out some cout thing that prints. And it's not that hard in some ways to make a jump to modern UI kind of tools. You get sort of protection and the types of things that are entered. You get all sorts of stuff for free, and it just sort of looks, you know, looks nicer. So the user interface is like a joke. If you have to explain it, it's not that good. I'm tempted to try to explain this, but then I think that would be okay. To build our new system, we hired an armada of business analysts and architects. Great, and who built the UI? I guess our intern used one of those UI builder tools. So it's a common issue, right? There's sort of the core logic in code, and then someone, maybe not even trained in this area at all, sort of tasked with making some kind of user interface. I would say that's changing. I think ever since smartphones came out and people realized that slick-looking interfaces can go a long way to helping people use those applications. There's been a renewed emphasis on the user experience. You see a lot of jobs for UX, UI kind of stuff now. It's sort of it's a technical job, but also involves psychology and things like that. So if you're interested in that area, there's still plenty of opportunities, especially in the CS background. Now we are going to use Qt, which I mentioned at some point. And again, I tend to call it Qt. And it's really a huge ecosystem. So it's one of these projects. It's a code base that takes a while to get into. And it's a useful experience just to use it because it has like its own enormous documentation and has its own enormous inheritance tree for objects in the system. And it takes a while to kind of gain experience with how things are done in the Qt world. And, so anyway, it's a good, nice big project to get involved in. We're not changing Qt, we're going to use it, but anyway, it's still kind of interesting. It grew out of the Nokia phone interfaces, so those flip phones with the memes, right? That you can't kill a Nokia phone kind of thing. That has a little tiny screen you can play Snake on or whatever. That was using this Qt interface system, which seems very specific, and it is, but somehow it grew out of those humble beginnings and is now a mighty cross-platform, Windows, Android, iOS, Mac, probably still Nokia phones, I don't know. Well, they're not really around anymore, are they? But anyway, it grew out of that, is now this big enterprise-level UI builder for C++. It's been around a long time, which means it implemented a lot of ideas before they made it into the C++ standard. So, not that Make was, but for example, it has its own version of Make called QMake. It has its own IDE that we're going to be using called Qt Creator, so a more of a Visual Studio Eclipse kind of environment. Yes, I know. Has its own types, QString and QInt, right? So there's a lot of arrogance here, right? Like, hey, this C++ int thing isn't quite what I want. I'm going to make my own int instead, and you should all use it. So you have to get used to the Qt way of doing things. The Qt way of doing things is you basically stick Q in front of everything, and you're kind of good to go. Now you can be a Qt specialist as a career. So for example, look on, I don't know why I picked Indeed or something, whatever that is, but software engineer, BodyViz, I actually know that, kind of cool company. There doesn't say much about Qt there. Here, embedded Qt firmware engineer, Qt Creator, QML, C++ engineer, templating in C++, Qt cross-platform, information security, software engineer, 60K. Garmin, they make GPSs and stuff. Oh yeah. Topaz, there's one I want to get down to. Let's see. Oh, hey. Qt, Tackle Challenge Robotics stuff. Engineering Intern 2020. Clicky, everyone. Right? But I mean, how many Qt people are out there, right? So this is a great specialty for you to have there. Now, what do you notice about some of these jobs? Like, is there a theme to them besides Qt? Yeah. And C++, right? Although they have this whole sort of JavaScripty kind of scripting language as well now that people use, so it's so hard to say. Oh, look, there's one. You can work for, anybody know this company? Coda Octopus Callneck? But also something about agile, so we're doing agile development here in a little bit, so you'll be all set up for this job. What do you notice about these jobs?
I have a question.
Okay.
Will this still be in the virtual machine or?
Let me get to that.
Okay.
What do you notice about these jobs? I mean, they're all over the place a little bit, but
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't look like any of them are web development.
yeah, they're not like full stack web stuff, which is what a lot of jobs are, right, these days.
Yeah.
So it's in a different space. What space does it look more like it's in?
A bunch of them seem to be embedded systems.
Yeah, like embedded systems. So when you buy a fridge that has a TV screen in it and it tells you things, that's probably a Qt application running on there. So these lightweight systems. Your car navigation thing, a lot of them are Qt applications. Whether that's actually an advertisement for Qt or not, since a lot of those are pretty horrible UIs, you know. But anyway, it's in a lot of spaces you don't think about, essentially. There are some Qt applications on your laptop, but a lot of them are in this sort of embedded Internet of Things kind of space, where maybe performance and sort of lightweightness in some ways is still a priority. Anybody know where Qt is used in a desktop or laptop space?
Malwarebytes uses it.
Malwarebytes does? Okay, their application is. I think more fundamentally, or go ahead. Yeah.
Pretty much the entirety of the KDE desktop.
Yeah, so KDE, one of the big Ubuntu desktop things, you know, is C++ and Qt. And so if you want to get involved in an open source project, that's a good background for that. So anyway, it's all used in different places, but a lot of it is in sort of these funny one-off kind of machine type things. So if that's your thing, especially if you're like a CE or something like that, that's probably a good match. Now, don't all run out and get a job actually this class and not finish your degree.
We have a job.
Yeah, good job. Okay, so how should we use Qt in this course? Ideal, add it to the virtual machine. Probably workable, install it on your regular machine, and then deal with whatever incompatibilities with your teammates that come up, and we can kind of deal with that. But at least short term, that's probably workable. Sort of workable. There's this HTML5 remote desktop that goes into the KLab pool machines, and so you open up, and we'll use the lab tomorrow to see what it's like. You see open your web browser or remote desktop, and I would say in some ways the user experience of this is often better than this. So it's not that bad, but it's like, you know, you're connected over the internet kind of thing, and managing some caching models while you're doing that. I meant to post a more dedicated page to installing Qt. Basically, on the website, you have to pick there's an open source and a commercial version. So if you're using this to develop things that are sold, you have to pay money to use Qt, otherwise it's free. And so you start the installer, you have to make a Qt account, where sometimes you have to sort of prove that you're interested in open source things, like I don't plan on releasing this for blah, blah, blah. And then the part that's important is if you just say install everything, it's going to be like 30 gigs of downloads. And so you want to be a little cautious and just pick the most current Qt, and then pick the machine type you're on. And it'll get it down to a slim 3 or 4 gigs of install. All right. And then there's something under the Qt creator part where you have to also add a compiler to the machine. There's sort of 2 parts to it. All right. And just kind of wait for a minute. Let me go right to the page on how to do that. And then basically depending on the machine you're on, you pick different compilers. And Linux, there's some more specialty stuff if you're doing that. But I have a link on the Linux page. So don't worry about that right now. All right, let's make a Qt app and kind of see how things get structured here. So once I install Qt, I get a Qt creator, which is an application, again, an IDE for developing software. And look, it has like a bunch of different things. Okay, so I make a new project. There's a whole bunch of different styles of applications it gives you sort of starter template code for. In this particular case, we're going to make a Qt widgets application. Widgets are just little lightweight Windows with a button on it kind of thing. And the quick stuff is that JavaScript kind of stuff I'm going to avoid. But the bindings for Python, which are kind of fun. So if you're ever doing Python development, much better than like the typical TK sort of standard default for Python UI building is if we go on the Qt stuff. I think it's a million times better. You can also make, for example, a C and C++ application here without any window material at all. All right, so I'm going to pick Qt widgets application. And you're going to want some folder that basically either has all your Qt projects in it or some for assignments, some for test code. You can kind of split it how you want. You can change where these are built. And I'm going to call this example in class. And then there's this thing called kits. This says select all kits. Or pick a kit. So if you have different compilers on your system, you can tell it to build for them using those different compilers. And in fact, you can sort of do a Travis kind of thing where you make a build for Mac OS and Android and whatever all at the same time. You hit build and it builds all of them at the same time. So you can kind of cross-platform compile for these things. I haven't really done much with that. I know there's a team 2 years ago that published theirs to their phone or something like that as well. And that was interesting, but I wasn't able to follow much on it. And then there's some stuff like it always makes a class that uses the widget class for you. We'll talk more about this at some point. And for the most part, I leave this alone for little test projects. If you get more complicated, you probably want to give them some better name than just like main window or something like that, right? So we can kind of ignore it. And then there's ways to add it to version control that I also haven't done too much with, but we'll probably try to add it up to GitHub or something like that. All right, so hit done finally, and he thinks sometimes it's sort of the newest version of this seems a little slower to me than the last one, which is weird. But every once in a while you say you do something and you have to kind of take a breath and wait for the green bar on the bottom right to finish doing stuff, and then finally things appear. But basically, it gives you some starter code. There's a main, and then a class for the window. All right, and we're going to talk about the different parts, but what I always like to do, of course, when I start something new, is try to run it. Just make sure you can do something before you break it, right? And I get an amazing window. Wow. Yeah. What have you? All right, so what do we get? We get a project file, .pro file. And in here, things are added to the Qt build, and it tells you a target, and it tells you some stuff that it's defining, and some configuration, C++11, and then the sources that are used, and the headers that are used, and the forms, which basically are sort of the UI builder forms, and then some mysterious stuff down here. So again, this is the kind of thing where you don't need to know everything about it, but what does this kind of remind you of a little bit?
Makefile.
Like a makefile, right? And in fact, there are times when you're going to want to go in here and take whatever nonsense the wizard has generated for you and like trim it down and make it just do makefile kind of thing. So there's variables in here, and at some point there's going to be like libraries in here and things like that. And so anyway, just kind of think of it as a makefile, that your experience in makefiles actually has some value, and sometimes in fixing this thing up and making it bending it to your will when things aren't going well. So don't be shy about looking in here. Then there is a main.cpp, and this is typically short. It basically typically makes an application, shows whatever widget might be in there, and then finishes. Now this statement's a loaded statement. When I say it finishes, right, we're returning out of main. What is really going on here, do you think? Just had to guess. It's what? Opens the window? This opens the window. Show a window. We're returning out of main. What happens when you return out of main? So in a normal C++ program, if you say return 0 in main, or return negative 1, what happens to your program? It finishes, right? So are we done with our program at this point? There must be something going on here, right? This basically fires off the the event loop for the application. So it listens for your mouse clicks, sees if you're scrolling windows around, it checks for events. And so there's some mechanism in here that's basically going to run. This is really where you run your actual program. This is kind of setting up the application and saying, show some stuff, and then this thing, it doesn't finish until you say quit on your program or hit the little X, on the top of the window. And then this finishes and finally returns out of here. So this goes off to some infinite loop somewhere, essentially. Okay. And I think that's the hard thing about developing user interfaces, is that we're sort of used to this flow of execution that's very easy to see. And of course, with a user interface, what happens is you say, wait for events to happen, and then an event happens and you respond to it. But you can't just sort of say, first we go here, and then we go here, and then we go here, and then we go here. It's all up to the user. It depends on how they click on things. And so understanding what a program does is much harder, I think, in a user interface style than in a traditional program that just sort of starts at the main and you can kind of track the flow as it goes through. All right, so main is basically, and you rarely change main. It's basically you always just change your widget or whatever custom widget you're making. Let's look at main window.h. So it's kind of weird, starting a project that's like all this code already, right? So there's some kind of namespace thing we don't know much about yet. And then there's this very mysterious header file. Some of it looks kind of normal. So we have public this. What is this thing here? What kind of thing is this? I should make that a little bigger too. Yeah, don't be thrown just because of the different context before you know, right? How about this one? What is this thing? It's an instructor. And what do you think this thing is then? Constructor, right? And we'll talk about this at some point. This is the default value, so you either give it a widget that this thing belongs to or null, it doesn't belong to anybody. And what kind of thing is this thing? Someone raise your hand and tell me what you think this thing is.
Window of UI.
Well, that's what, okay, in a C++ header file context, what category of things does this fall into?
It's a like member variable.
It's a data member. It's a data member. It's a variable, right? It's an instance variable. It's private. That's the first thing. What's private in classes? It's the instance variables, right? So what is this thing here?
I guess it's just basically using main window method from the UI header class.
It's a type, first of all, right? And it's a pointer to something that's the UI for this main window or something like that. We'll learn. And this is the name of the data member, right? So anyway, don't, just because you start decorating stuff and all sorts of things you would not normally write in your own code, don't let yourself get derailed as to seeing the bigger structure of this, right? There's methods, there's data members, and what's this thing? Like, are we going to just start typing capital letters in the middle of our header files? Well, let's find out. We'll use the amazing power of the IDE to follow the symbol under cursor. Boom. That's all clear now. What is this?
A macro.
This is what we call a macro, right? If you define a variable, we were doing this with our header files, right? We're doing our include guards. We had this defined thing. And often these variables have values. In this case, it says, anytime you see Q underscore object in all capital letters, replace it with these words here. Are there more words in this? So it replaces that Q object in the header file with all of this stuff. And apparently, almost all of it replaces with are also their own macros that expand to some other set of code. So this is some nightmare set of sort of, well, of methods and things that make these widgets work together in the user interface. So this is basically the glue that makes like able to handle events and things like that. And it's so nasty looking, they said, let's not provide this as code that anyone looks at ever. Let's replace it with this innocent looking QObject macro and have all this code be underneath. So even though that looks kind of innocent up there, it's actually kind of interesting what that turns into eventually. But you know, that gets replaced with, I'm going to say, 1,000 lines of code that defines how this Qt system basically works. So you don't really ever want to mess with that, but there's a lot going on underneath there. So when this compiles, that word gets swapped out for all the things that it gets replaced with, and then it compiles that instead. All right. Let's look at main window.cpp. So this is the implementation of the main window class. And in fact, we include main window.h, so we know about the class. And we include this sort of mysterious thing we'll talk about in a minute, the UI for the main window. And in here, the constructor says, what is this kind of thing here? What is this line doing?
Similar to a super constructor.
Yeah, that's right. So we talked about the way to initialize the base class. And one thing we sort of skipped over in main window is that it inherits from QMain window. So there's an already defined class, QMain window. Main window is our own class that is apparently going to have some custom behaviors from QMain window, and we inherit from it. And then in main window.cpp, this is the initializer list for the constructor. And we're initializing QMain window with this parent widget if we want it. And we're also initializing this UI data member with apparently a new object that class. And then we set up the UI, and the instructor we delete the UI. So one question is, where does this UI thing come from? There's no UI main window thing here. And so instead, I'm going to go to my project folder. Here's example in class with a code in it. And above it is build-example in class -desktop qt513 claim 64-bit debug. So when I run this program, it tries to put all the little .o files and things into this build folder. It tries to keep separate the source and the build in separate folders, just so they don't contaminate each other. And this is partly because also for one source folder, I might have an Android kit, and I might have a Windows compiler kit, and I might have a Mac one. And so there could be multiple build folders for one source directory. So I know this is all tiny, I'm sorry. So here's like some .o, main window.o, main.o, and actually an application example in class.app that I could, presumably run from here. There's actually a makefile. That's sort of exciting. Actually, let's take a look at the makefile. I don't know. See what it wants to do for us. Whoa, okay. So here's makefile. It has a lot of flags it defines. And I know there's no actor really nice. Okay. Well, at some point, maybe you want to look at that. I don't know. What it also has is a UI main window.h. And I'm going to have a Qt Trader. And in UI main window.h, there's stuff like this setup UI that gets called in our main window.cpp. And it has like a menu bar that's made in here, and a central widget, and some other stuff. So essentially, when I say make this project, it looks at the sort of widgets that we're trying to build in, buttons and the sliders and things like that. It turns that information into a class with a header file and a CPP file. And then it compiles that code into your project. So it takes sort of a text representation of your UI and turns it into the code that it can compile. And that code belongs here in this build folder instead of the source folder. So you have to kind of hunt around for it a little bit. All right, so the one remaining thing that's added is this UI file. And again, this is the interactive drag and drop kind of builder for user interfaces. So you can either build them from by hand by saying, make me a widget and put it in this kind of like layout, or you can do it all in the GUI. So let's see what the GUI thing looks like. I double click on this. This is my widget. I can add a, what should I add? Let's see. Is that a button? So just look at the tools along here, you know, see if there are. I grab a button, drag it over there. I'm going to have a button on my interface. So in fact, if I hit run, I have a button. Although what is it telling me here? UI was changed on disk, reload it. All right, so notice as a predefined widget, this thing has a bunch of behaviors already, like it flashes when it's clicked and acts like a modern UI button. You don't have to invent all those things yourself, right? They're all there for you. And your main job is to then figure out what should happen when that button is clicked. I'm going to click that. I'm going to add in, for some reason, I'm going to add in a spin box, which is a number with a up and down arrow. And let's go crazy and add in a scroll bar while we're in it. All right. Now if I run this, stop saying that. Oh, go ahead. I have it loaded up in here. All right, so button, spin box, slider. The slider is pretty basic, right? Like, there's all sorts of options for that. Show tick mark, show min-max values, change the min-max values. You can customize a lot, so it looks like you want it to look like. So they all have some built-in behaviors. Now this thing, to get out of here, I feel like I'm missing something, but basically, just find the CPP file instead and get back to editing mode over here. If I go to UI main window, it's got reloading. All of a sudden, in the constructor notice, I've added a push button data member for this UI class. I've added a spin box for the UI class and a horizontal scroll bar for the UI class. So it took that UI file, said, what are the widgets that are added here? Where are they? And then turned that into C++ code in this class. So it generates this class for you, and then it compiles it and runs it in the project. So the important thing here is don't get into that build folder and start just adding stuff here yourself, because it's going to be overwritten the next time you hit build on the UI. All right, the UI is the main way to kind of add these things in this class at least. And again, you never really look at this yourself. I'm just going to show you a little bit of this. All right, so here's the UI. It doesn't really do anything at this point, right? It just has our default behavior. So the way you connect these components together in Qt is a pretty general mechanism called signals and slots. So widgets emit signals, and widgets have slots that receive signals. And you connect them together in order to make those behaviors work with each other. There's a lot of different ways to do this, but if I can click up here, instead of being in the editing mode, there is a edit signal slots. Now I can grab this guy, and, no, let's not grab this one. Let's do something else. Cancel it. Let's grab this one and drag it to the slider. All right? So I'm basically saying I want my spin box. It has some preset built signals that are available. I'm going to connect one of those to a preset slot here in the slider. And eventually we'll have your own custom signals and custom slots, but for now we can do a lot of that just with the default slot. So I drag it over there. This pops up. And here are the signals available from the spin box. I'm done editing. Basically, which I guess you could like return or something in there. I don't even know how to do that. Value change, and you can get a string out that is presumably the value. Or you can do the same thing but with an int coming out. So this is an overloaded method here. And I'm going to pick the value change. And the slot for the scroll bar that matches the parameter type of that has an int coming in is set value. So I'm going to click that. So presumably, when this value change signal, which are sort of the events, something has happened, you hit the scroll bar, you've changed it somehow, it generates this signal and carries along this integer value that is presumably whatever value is in the spin box. And it passes that as a parameter to set value with the slider, and then the slider does whatever it does when it gets a new value. All right, so I'm going to hit OK. And now if I run my code, I gotta close that window because it's driving me crazy here. Running window. Back. All right. So run it. Push button still hanging out. Slider has no signal attached to anything, so it doesn't change anything. Spin box. Change the number, and then mysteriously, the very faint slider moves across the page. Because of that. It's a little clearer on my screen. All right, seeing that, what is your next instinct? What do you want to do?
Make the slider also change the scroll box.
Yeah, they can go both ways, right? So slider scroll, slider change the spin box. And that starts to sound like maybe a potential infinite loop, but somehow it goes stop. So I'm going to drag from here to there. Ooh, and so the slider has more options, but it has a good old value change that we like. And the spin box has set value. Okay. This is already looking a little bit, it's painful to look at, right? So you can imagine this gets really complicated. It's not that you use really all that hard. I run it. All right, that's easy living right there. So that has min and max values that are set. All right. What's the next? Okay, now we're on a roll. Now we have a whole team building an application. I feel like we're close to release at this point, but we need one more killer feature on here. Do you have a killer feature for me or a question? How did I get to it? So there's some very tiny icons up top. This is for editing widgets, so basically changing properties and so on. This is the edit signal slots. I don't know what a buddy is. Edit buddies. They added that recently. Hover, come on. Edit tab order. Yeah. Layout, so you can do some layout stuff here. There's other ways of doing layout. Or layout. All the rest is sort of layout stuff. The main two, I think, are these edit the actual add widgets to your form, and then edit the signal slots. All right, I need a killer feature.
Push button just resets it back to 0.
Exactly what I'm looking for. I want a reset button. All right? So first of all, I'm going to change this name of the widget, not the thing out. This is like the internal code from push button to reset button. And I'm going to change the text on here. Actually, I can do it here, I think. Reset. All right, that's how we encourage people to use our features. And I'm going to run it to make sure that looks okay. Woo-hoo. Look, what's a 0? That's not good testing. Okay, nothing happens here. Now, there's a couple ways to make a custom action. Let's custom action. There's not like a reset. Well, I think there was a reset on the slider, actually, to be honest. But let's just pretend there's not like a reset thing anywhere, and we need to make this happen. I can actually do it from here. We're saying go to slot. That's not a good name. Just go to slot. It really says make slot. So make a slot to do a custom behavior. And I think it's okay if you want to do that for the simple kinds of things. But I want to do the full-fledged like process of doing it in code, so you can see what's going on with it. So I'm going to go back to my name window.h, and there's a fun thing. So we have public and private. What's the other access modifier for classes? Protected. Protected, which means derived classes can get to it, but not outside the inheritance chain. Qt, again, in its infinite wisdom or arrogance, has decided to have another access modifier called the public slot. And there's also public signal. So they're just toying with us at this point. But you basically say, I want this method here to be considered a slot in this agent. Okay? And all this stuff up here is what makes that sort of happen eventually. So I'm going to write a void button click slot, button click slot. That's the prototype for it. And copy that. And we're going to go to main.cpp. And I'm going to add in that slot. Now, I need to make sure it's part of the class. So I add the class scope to it. And in here, I want to take that spin box or slider and set it to 0. So how do I get to it? So first of all those things that were in the UI builder come from this UI class. So I have to access it through this UI class. So I'm going to say UI, and that's a pointer. So I use the arrow notation to get to the things inside the UI class. And in here is the reset button. So I put that. And then I have to try this. I don't want the reset button. The reset button causes to happen. I want the slider, or the spin box, right? I'm going to take the spin box, and I want to reset its value. So this is a big system. How am I going to do this? How am I going to decide how to reset the spin box? What are my problem-solving approaches here? What are my resources? So I can go online, and I can go to the Qt website and find a spin box, a Q spin box, and look through its list of methods, and I hope that one of them is reset. It's also possible that it inherits one of those methods from a base class, so sometimes you have to go through the inheritance chain and just go to Q number thingamabob and see what its methods are and see what's there. So that's a reasonable way to do it. Any other ideas?
Try dot and see if copy.
All right, so see what the IDE knows about, and I think that's a pretty good way to go. And maybe a third way. So official documentation, autocomplete from the IDE.
Stack Overflow.
What's that? Stack Overflow. Yeah, just Google and say Qt. Maybe say Qt5 or something like that, because there's some old ways of doing stuff. Qt5 reset spin box, and I'll take you some Stack Overflow questions. Spin box is a pointer to the spin box, so I have to use the arrow notation to access it. And to be honest, we already knew the answer here. Set value is the thing that sets it to a value. Maybe there's an explicit reset. Set to 0. Oh yeah, right. Maybe set minimum would be the right thing, but I'm gonna do this one anyway to see what happens. Because maybe 0 is smaller than minimum, and I'm not sure what would happen in that case. It probably would force us to minimum. But all right, so now we said there's a slot in the main application that, when it's activated, will set the spin box to 0. And we have to somehow connect it to a signal. And the way to connect it to a signal, you're not going to do that UI builder stuff, is up here, you make a connect call. And I'm going to connect the UI reset button with a signal from Q push button. And again, you have to kind of just know this or look it up and figure it out. And Q push button, that's a signal. I will explain the syntax of this next lecture. This is really a pointer to a method. And then, I'm going to explain it right now. So the widget is the one receiving this signal, this main window widget. So this is the main window widget. And it now has a slot. So Q main window? No, main window. Button, click slot. All right, so I'd say the syntax is a little particular here, but basically it is the object that is emitting the signal, the push button. It is a particular signal that it's emitting, the click signal, the object that's receiving the signal, and the slot for that object. So it's two things to define where it comes from, two things to define what it's receiving here. All right. And that's enough stuff. I run it. Look at me, I'm wild and free. Boom, no you're not. So notice also here, I was changing it here, that was changing it here. When I had reset, I told the spin box to change, and then it propagated that signal from here because it had a value change that happened, an event that happened. And so it did its own signal that told this thing to change its value to its current value, which was 0. All right? I didn't have to connect the both of them. I could just kind of kick off the change and let it all happen. All right. Let's do one more tiny thing. I'm going to go back to this. I'm going to go to the slot now. And what's going to happen as it clicks here? Repeat it. I don't know. Okay. It added a slot for me in my main window. I'm going to main window.h. Oh, it made it a private slot. How fussy. All right. So I made mine a public slot. It made this a private slot, which is probably a better choice anyway. And gave it a name on reset button clicked. And then provided some starter code in here, and I can do a cout, reset clicked. That's not very exciting. Add an exclamation point, so it's exciting. And I gotta include. I pulled like a huge one. So I can run now, hit reset, and it's saying reset clicked, right? So notice I can have multiple behaviors based on the same signal. I can have connected to different slots. Now notice it did not add in any new connect code here, and that's because that connect code is done in the UI main window hidden class inside the build folder, where it makes the connections between the UI elements and other things there. So that connect is still happening somewhere, but it's in the automatically generated code for this. All right. So that's the basics. Tomorrow lab, you're gonna do a little image flip program. Continue this a little bit. Start looking at the apps. All right. Currently, it's time for